I had lived in this house for over 30 years. The walls still carried the faint scent of my late husband's cologne, that warm blend of cedar and bergamot he used to wear before his heart betrayed him one quiet Sunday morning. The house had seen laughter, grief, and everything in between. I thought nothing could surprise me anymore, until that night. I had just come downstairs for a glass of water. The clock over the dining table showed 10:47 p.m., too late for anything but quiet. I was barefoot, the wooden floor cold beneath my soles. The low hum of voices came from the kitchen, followed by Rebecca's laughter. It wasn't the gentle, honey-sweet laugh she used when she wanted to charm me. This one was sharp, cruel. The kind of laugh that scraped across the heart like a knife on porcelain. "Lord," she said between giggles, "I can't stand living with that older woman much longer. If she calls this her house again, I will lose it. But at least she pays for everything like a good little ATM." Silence. Then another voice, my son's voice. "Marcus." He chuckled softly. "Just hang in there, babe. Once Mom signs over the property, it's ours. She's getting forgetful anyway. It won't be hard to convince her." I froze. The glass slipped slightly in my hand, clinking against the sink. For a second, I thought I'd imagined it. My boy, my only son, the same child I'd worked double shifts to raise, whose shoes I polished before every school play was laughing about stealing my home. The air in my chest turned to stone. Rebecca's voice dropped to a whisper. "Think about it. She's tired. She barely remembers where she leaves her purse half the time. We keep being friendly, patient, and loving. She'll be too confused to know what she signed in a few months." I leaned against the wall, pressing a trembling hand to my mouth to avoid making a sound. The world around me blurred, the ticking clock, the refrigerator's hum, the soft light spilling across the tile floor. Every familiar sound now felt foreign, like I'd woken inside someone else's nightmare. For years, I'd believed that loving your child was enough, that kindness would be returned, loyalty repaid. But in that moment, I realized how wrong I was. They weren't waiting for me to die. They were trying to erase me while I was still alive. My first instinct was disbelief, the second pure, undiluted rage. But beneath it all, a strange calm began to rise. The calm only comes when a storm inside you finds direction. I stepped out from the hallway. Marcus and Rebecca were sitting at the kitchen table, my kitchen table. My husband and I bought the one when he was promoted at Grady Hospital. Marcus's arm was around her shoulder, and they looked up startled like two children caught stealing candy. I set the glass down gently on the counter. "So I said, my voice steady, that's what you think of me." Rebecca blinked. "Evelyn?" I cut her off. "No, don't you dare say my name like you care. You've had your fun playing sweet daughter-in-law." I heard every word. Marcus opened his mouth, then shut it again. His face turned pale. "Mom, it's not—" "It's exactly what it sounds like," I said. "You two have 24 hours to pack your things and leave my house." Rebecca gasped. "What? You can't— Oh, I can—" I said, stepping closer, my eyes never leaving hers. "And I will. Noah stays with me. You're not taking that boy anywhere." Their faces twisted through more emotions than I could count. Shock, guilt, anger, disbelief. Marcus looked at me like a stranger might, like he was seeing someone new. Rebecca's mouth opened and closed like a fish. 24 hours, I repeated quietly. "Then I'm changing the locks." I turned and walked upstairs without another word, leaving them frozen at the table. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the banister to steady myself. In my bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed where my husband once slept, staring at the framed photo of him holding baby Marcus in his arms. I remembered the nights I'd come home from the hospital exhausted, how he'd stay up making coffee, how we'd whisper about our son's future college family, the life we never had. "Look at what we raised," I whispered into the silence. "A man who thinks betrayal is just business." My chest ached, but no tears came. Maybe I'd run out of them long ago. Instead, I felt something else, a slow, burning determination. They wanted to play games fine. They'd forgotten who taught Marcus how to fight for what's his. They'd forgotten I wasn't just someone's mother. I was a woman who'd survived poverty, racism, loss, and loneliness. That night, I wrote everything I'd overheard, every word, every tone. I slipped the paper into my drawer beside my husband's old police badge. Proof. I didn't know how deep their betrayal went yet, but I knew one thing: I wouldn't go down quietly. Before turning off the lamp, I whispered a prayer not for peace, but for strength. The next morning, sunlight crept through the curtains like nothing had happened. Rebecca avoided my eyes as she poured coffee, her fake smile stretched too tight. Marcus kept glancing at his phone, avoiding conversation. The silence was thick enough to choke on. I looked at both of them and thought, you have no idea what's coming. They thought they were dealing with a fragile older woman. They had no idea they'd just awakened the storm. If you've ever felt unseen, underestimated, or betrayed by those you love, most remember silence isn't weakness. It's the sound of strength gathering its breath before it speaks. Share this story if it touched you. Someone out there should remember they still have power. I remember the day she first arrived. It was one of those gray Atlanta afternoons when the rain doesn't fall, but the air feels heavy enough to drown you. The azalea bushes outside the porch sagged with dew, and I was sitting by the window with a cup of tea, half reading a book I'd read 100 times before. The house had been quiet for too long, too calm for a woman who'd once lived surrounded by voices. Then came the knock. When I opened the door, there she was, Rebecca. She couldn't have been more than 22. Her belly was round beneath a thin denim jacket, and her eyes, big and glossy like a doll's, looked up at me with a trembling kind of hope. "Mrs. Moore?" she asked softly, rain misting her hair. "I'm Rebecca. Marcus told me I could come by." For a second, I didn't even connect the name. My son hadn't mentioned he was seeing anyone seriously. When he finally called me the night before, his tone had been careful, even nervous. "Mom, I've been seeing someone. She's pregnant." That word, pregnant, had landed like a pebble dropped into deep water, sending ripples through the quiet I'd built since my husband's death. The girl stood before me, shivering, her hand resting protectively on her stomach. Behind her, an old car idled at the curb, smoke curling from the exhaust. "I'm sorry to show up like this," she said, voice cracking. "My mom, she kicked me out, said I brought shame to the family. I don't have anywhere to go. I could have asked 100 questions then." Why hadn't Marcus told me sooner? Was this girl telling the truth? Why was she here at my doorstep instead of with him? But I didn't, because there was something in her eyes, not just fear, but desperation. And I remembered being young and desperate once too. "Come in," I said, moving aside. "You shouldn't be standing in the cold." She hesitated, as if afraid to dirty the floor. When she stepped inside, she exhaled shakily, her shoulders trembling. I fetched her a towel, tea, and a blanket from the couch. For a while, she just sat there staring at her hands. Then she began to talk. She told me how her mother had thrown her out when she found out about the pregnancy. Marcus had been working double shifts at a warehouse and couldn't afford a place yet, how she'd been sleeping in her car for 2 nights afraid someone would break in. Her voice trembled, but she never cried outright. The restraint made it seem more believable, or maybe it made me want to believe her. "Please, Mrs. Moore," she said finally, clutching her cup with both hands. "I'll find a job soon. I need a roof over my head until the baby comes. I promise I won't cause any trouble." Outside, thunder rolled across the sky like distant drums. Inside, I felt something crack open the old instinct to protect, to nurture. I'd been alone for years, surviving on the echoes of family dinners and birthdays that no one celebrated anymore. Maybe, strangely, I wanted company. "You can stay," I said, "at least until the baby's born. We'll figure out the rest later." Her head shot up, disbelief flashing in her eyes. Then tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, "Thank you. I swear I won't let you regret it." I believed her. God help me, I did. Marcus came the next morning. He looked tired, guilt written across his face. "Mom, I didn't know she'd come here," he said, rubbing his neck. "I told her I'd talk to you first." "Well, I said, pouring him coffee, she's here now. And she's carrying your child. You're going to have to step up." He nodded, his eyes softening when Rebecca walked into the room. For a fleeting moment, they looked like any young couple in love, scared but hopeful. I wanted to hold on to that image. The following weeks were strangely peaceful. Rebecca helped around the house, folding laundry, washing dishes, and humming softly. She'd thank me for everything, dinner, fresh sheets, and letting her stay. She'd say, "You're such a blessing, Mrs. Moore," smiling that gentle, grateful smile. No one's ever been this kind to me. It was easy to love her then, easy to see her as the daughter I never had. Marcus would come home from work exhausted at night, and we would eat dinner together. Sometimes, when Rebecca leaned her head on his shoulder, I'd feel a warmth spreading through my chest, the feeling of family returning. The laughter, conversation, and even the baby's name debates made the house feel alive again. They decided on Noah early on. "It means rest and peace," Rebecca told me, running her hand over her belly. "That's what I want for him, a peaceful life." I smiled. Then may he bring peace to all of us. I truly believed it then. But life has a cruel way of showing how fragile hope can be. It started small moments that didn't fit. A story Rebecca told one day would change slightly the next. She said she grew up in Macon and later mentioned a childhood in Savannah. She once claimed her father died in a car accident, then later said he'd left when she was 6. When I gently pointed it out, she laughed it off. "Oh, I mix things up sometimes. Pregnancy brain, you know I wanted to believe it. But a small part of me, the same part that spent years reading people's faces in hospital wards, noticed the flicker behind her eyes each time she lied." Then there was the phone call. I'd wanted to surprise her mother, to let her know her daughter was safe. It took me a week to track down the number. When I finally called, a woman answered. "Hello, this is Nancy," I asked. "I'm Evelyn Moore, Marcus's mother. Rebecca is doing fine. You must be relieved." Silence. Then a low, bitter laugh. "Relieved," the woman said coldly. "Be careful with that girl, Mrs. Moore. She's not what she pretends to be." And the line went dead. I remember sitting there staring at the receiver. The words echoed in my head like thunder. She's not what she pretends to be. I wanted to dismiss it, to think maybe it was anger misunderstanding a mother's cruelty. But the unease stayed settling in my chest like smoke that refused to clear. Still, I said nothing. I told myself not to judge and that people deserve second chances. When Noah was born a few weeks later, all my doubts vanished, at least for a while. He was the most beautiful baby I'd ever seen, small, perfect, with skin the color of honey and eyes like liquid silver. I thought my heart would burst the first time Marcus placed him in my arms. All the years of loneliness, all the nights talking to empty rooms melted away as I rocked him gently and whispered, "Welcome home, baby boy." For those first weeks, happiness felt real again. Rebecca seemed softer, gentler, glowing with the light of new motherhood. She called me Mom sometimes, and every time she did, something inside me healed. We'd sit together in the evening, sipping tea while Noah slept, talking about the future, about schools, birthdays, and the garden I'd plant for him come spring. But even then, the cracks were forming. I caught her staring around the house sometimes, her gaze lingering on the framed photographs, the antique furniture, the silver set my husband left me. Not with admiration, but with a quiet, measuring look, as if she was cataloging everything she saw. One evening I found her in my study going through a drawer. She smiled when I asked what she was doing. "Just looking for a pen," she said. Her voice was light, but her hand trembled slightly as she closed it. That night I couldn't sleep. I told myself I was overreacting, that motherhood was making her anxious, that fatigue could make anyone careless. But somewhere deep inside, a whisper began to form. "Be careful." The whisper grew louder with each passing day. It came when she rearranged the furniture without asking. When she called Marcus into another room, I tried to talk to him every time. When my grandmother's pearl earrings vanished from the jewelry box, whenever I confronted her, she'd tilt her head, concern painted perfectly on her face. "Are you sure, Mrs. Moore?" "Maybe you misplaced them. You've been so busy lately." That tone, sweet, gentle, soaked in false sympathy, made me feel small, uncertain, even crazy. And when Marcus started looking at me with that same pitying expression, I realized how easily lies could rewrite the truth. The girl I had welcomed into my home was no longer the same. Or maybe she had always been the same, I had just been too lonely to see it. Still, I told myself there must be some mistake. Until the night I found them whispering in the living room. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop. I was only walking down for a cup of tea, but their voices carried through the thin walls. "She's losing it," Rebecca whispered. "Soon everyone will see it. Once we get the power of attorney, it'll be simple. She won't even remember." I froze. The tea mug slipped from my hand, shattering on the floor. That was the first night I realized I might be living with a stranger and sleeping under the same roof as Betrayal. The first real sign that something had changed came quietly, almost too quietly to notice. It started with the silence. Not the peaceful kind that fills a home in the evening, but the heavy, deliberate sort that feels like a warning. The type of silence that means someone has started keeping secrets. Rebecca stopped talking to me in the mornings. She used to hum while she made breakfast, ask me about my garden, and comment on how much Noah was growing. Now her words were measured polite and wrapped in ice. "Good morning, Mrs. Moore." Not Mom Evelyn, or even the cheerful, "Hey there" she once used, just Mrs. Moore. I told myself she was tired postpartum blues, maybe. I'd seen it before years ago at the hospital, new mothers, who drifted into sadness hormones, fighting reason. I told myself she'd come around. But then the little things began to disappear. At first, I thought I was distracted. My wedding ring wasn't in its usual place on the dresser. My reading glasses vanished from the nightstand. A $20 bill I'd set aside for groceries was missing from my wallet. I looked everywhere, blaming my forgetfulness, but each time I mentioned it, Rebecca would tilt her head with that perfectly sympathetic expression. "Maybe you misplaced it, Mrs. Moore. You've been under a lot of stress." "It happens," she'd say it gently with that soft little smile that never reached her eyes. And the more she said it, the more I began questioning myself. Was I losing things? Was I forgetting I'd worked as a nurse for 40 years? I'd been sharp enough to handle medical emergencies, medications, trauma. My mind had always been my anchor. But doubt, once planted, grows fast. Then one afternoon I caught a familiar scent as Rebecca walked past me, jasmine and musk, the perfume my late husband bought me the year before he died. I hadn't worn it in months. The bottle had vanished from my dresser weeks ago. For a moment, the world tilted. "Rebecca," I said quietly, "that perfume, where did you get it?" She blinked, feigning confusion. "Oh, this..." It was a gift from a friend. I smiled tightly, nodding. "I see." And I did. That night I checked my jewelry box. The pearl earrings my grandmother had passed down gone, my silver bracelet missing. My savings envelope where I kept emergency cash was thinner than before. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the empty velvet space where those pearls once lay, and felt something inside me shift. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was disbelief, curdled with grief. This girl, this woman I'd welcomed into my home, protected, defended, was robbing me piece by piece. I wanted to confront her, but Marcus had already started looking at me differently. When I brought up my missing things, his brows furrowed in concern. "Mom," he said softly, "you've been forgetting things lately. You should get checked out, just to be safe." "Checked out?" I repeated, feeling the words cut into me. He sighed like he was talking to a stubborn child. "Rebecca's worried. You've been misplacing stuff and repeating yourself. I don't want you to be sick and not know it." Sick. That word echoed in my chest like a slow heartbeat of betrayal. "I'm fine," I said, forcing calm. "I may be old, but I'm not senile." "Of course, Mom," he said gently, but his careful, patient tone told me he didn't believe it. From that moment on, I started watching them. Rebecca's act was flawless. When Marcus was home, she was sweet, laughing, and affectionate, always deferring to me in small ways that made her look respectful. But the moment he left for work, her face changed. It was subtle at first. A roll of the eyes when I spoke, a sigh when I entered the room, a muttered, "You're hovering again," when I tried to help with Noah. I told myself not to take it personally, but it grew worse. She began rearranging my furniture, moving the couch, swapping my paintings, and decluttering my shelves without asking. "The house feels too old-fashioned," she'd say lightly. "We should modernize a bit." We. Each word felt like a minor theft of space ownership and belonging. One morning I came downstairs and found my late husband's photograph gone from the mantel. When I asked, Rebecca said it was dusty, Mrs. Moore. I didn't want Noah breathing that in. I wanted to scream, but instead I smiled, because something in me, the quiet part that had endured years of hospital politics and loss, knew that anger wouldn't save me. Strategy would. So I played along. I let her believe I was fading. I let her move my things, make her plans. But I began to keep records, little notes hidden in the pages of my Bible, documenting what vanished when and how she reacted. By the end of that month, my list was long. She'd taken jewelry, perfumes, small sums of cash, and even my spare phone. I didn't know it yet, but she'd soon use that phone to impersonate me. The breaking point came one Saturday afternoon. Marcus had gone to work, and I was baking sweet potato pie, Noah's favorite. The baby was in his playpen, gurgling softly. I was humming to him when Rebecca walked in. "You're hovering again," she said sharply. I looked up. "Excuse me." "Overstimulation," she said, her tone clipped professional. "You're smothering him. He needs calm, consistent energy, not this." I set down the spoon slowly. "This?" she shrugged, folding her arms. "I read that older adults can confuse infants, too many conflicting cues. It's not your fault. It's just age." There it was, the dagger dressed as a diagnosis. I took a breath, forcing my voice steady. "Rebecca, I've raised a child before." "Yes," she said sweetly, "and look how he turned out." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Before I could reply, she picked up Noah and left the kitchen. The air behind her felt poisoned. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Every creak of the old house sounded like a whisper. I noticed how Rebecca and Marcus talked in murmurs after dinner, how their voices dropped when I entered a room. I'd catch fragments, memory issues, evaluation, guardianship. At first, I didn't want to believe it, but denial is hope dressed up as logic. One evening, I heard my name. "She accused me again," Rebecca whispered. "She said I stole her earrings." "Marcus, it's escalating. What if she hurts herself? Or Noah?" My blood turned cold. Marcus's voice was low, uncertain. "I don't know. Let's get her checked. A doctor or a facility." Rebecca interrupted just for her own safety. The spoon slipped from my hand, clattering against the counter. Their voices stopped. I stood frozen, listening to the silence that followed. When they finally spoke again, it was quieter, sharper, the sound of two people planning something unholy. That night, I wrote everything down. Dates, words, details. I didn't know exactly what they were planning yet, but I knew one thing: my son was no longer my ally. He was her accomplice. The days that followed blurred together. The house no longer felt like mine. Rebecca dictated the schedule when Noah napped, when meals were served, even when I could hold my grandson. Every kindness I'd once shown her was now a weapon she used to cage me. When I tried to cook, she'd tell me to rest. When I offered to watch Noah, she'd say he needed structure. When I spoke to Marcus, she'd answer for him. Even Noah began to cry when I approached, not because he feared me, but because Rebecca snatched him away so fast that he learned to associate my touch with tension. Each day I felt myself shrinking inside my own home. I'd wake up early, sit on the porch before dawn, and try to remember who I used to be, the woman who ran an entire ward, raised a child alone, built a life from ashes. But every time I walked back inside, I felt like an intruder. I didn't know it then, but Rebecca was already collecting her evidence, minor incidents. She'd record notes, she'd twist half-truths, she'd feed Marcus. She was building a story, one where I was the villain, and my own son was helping her write it. One night, I found Rebecca standing by the kitchen counter, whispering into her phone. She didn't hear me approach. "Yes," she said softly. "She's getting worse. The confusion, the paranoia. She even accused me of stealing again today." "We'll need those documents ready soon." My throat went dry. She turned, then startled. Her face went pale, but she recovered quickly. "Mrs. Moore." "You scared me. I was ordering groceries." I didn't answer. I looked at her for a long, quiet moment. Her smile faltered. I saw her clearly for the first time, not the lost, grateful girl who'd knocked on my door, but the predator beneath the skin. Her beauty, her charm, even her tears, all tools, all performance. I went to bed that night knowing the war had already begun, and the next time she whispered my name, I would be ready. I'd overheard the morning after that phone call and couldn't eat. The house, once my sanctuary, now felt like enemy ground. Every sound, the creak of a floorboard, the clatter of dishes in the sink, even Noah's soft babbling made my heart jump. Rebecca moved through the kitchen with a quiet efficiency that made my skin crawl. She didn't look at me anymore. She looked past me as if I'd already ceased to exist. Marcus, caught between us, tried to fill the silence with forced small talk, but every word fell flat. I told them I was going to the pharmacy. In truth, I had no intention of picking up anything. I just needed to breathe air that didn't reek of lies. Outside, the sky was pale, washed out, the kind of winter morning that made Atlanta feel older than it was. My hands trembled as I clutched the steering wheel. I hadn't driven much since my husband died. Marcus always worried about my eyes, my reflexes. But that morning I went anyway. I needed answers. Nancy's address was still in my notebook, the one I'd used when I first called her months ago. After finding her number on an old directory site, I'd written it down. At the time, I thought I was being polite, connecting one grandmother to another. Now I understood that what she'd said, "Be careful with that girl," hadn't been spite. It had been a warning. It took me nearly 40 minutes to reach her apartment complex, a worn red brick building on the east side, its balconies lined with plastic flower pots and faded wind chimes. I climbed the stairs slowly, my cane tapping against each step, echoing like a heartbeat. When Nancy opened the door, her face went through a dozen emotions, instantly shock, guilt, recognition, and finally something that looked like sorrow. "Oh, Lord," she whispered, pressing a hand to her chest. "She's done it again, hasn't she?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. She stepped aside wordlessly, letting me in. The apartment smelled of coffee and lemon polish. Photos were everywhere, mostly old yellowed family portraits curling at the corners. But none showed Rebecca as an adult. The last one must have been from high school, a smiling girl in a blue dress clutching a bouquet. Nancy noticed me looking. "That picture," she said, her voice low, "was the last time I recognized my daughter." We sat at the small kitchen table, two women bound by the same ghost. She poured coffee, but neither of us touched it. Her hands shook as she reached for a cigarette, then decided against it. "She tells her stories well, doesn't she?" Nancy began. "Always has. When she was little, she used to make up entire lives teachers who didn't exist, friends she'd never met, people who'd supposedly hurt her. At first, I thought she had an overactive imagination." Her voice hardened. "Then she started stealing. I said nothing, just let her speak. She took my jewelry when she was 15 and pawned it for cash. Told me she needed money for a school trip. When I found out, she cried, saying her friends had pressured her. I forgave her like a fool. But it got worse. She lied to her grandmother and stole her checkbook. When her father died, she sold his wedding ring. That was when I told her to leave. I thought if she hit rock bottom, maybe she'd learn." Nancy looked at me, eyes wet and fierce. "But Rebecca doesn't hit rock bottom. She builds a house there and invites herself to dinner." I felt my throat tighten. "She told me you threw her out because she was pregnant." Nancy laughed bitterly. "Pregnant. She wasn't even showing when she left. She used that story before every time she wanted pity. Evelyn, my daughter doesn't just lie. She studies people. She finds out what makes them kind, what makes them soft, and then she uses it." I looked down at my trembling hands. She found out I was widowed. She knew Marcus was all I had left, and that, Nancy said quietly, is precisely why she chose you. We sat in silence for a long while. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. Somewhere, a dog barked. Inside, the truth pressed on my chest like a weight. When Nancy finally spoke again, her tone was different, calm, deliberate, almost like she'd been preparing for this moment. "I kept a file," she said. "I documented it every time she did it, every relative, every friend, names, dates, police reports. I didn't think I'd ever need it again, but maybe you do." She stood, disappeared into the next room, and returned with a worn manila folder held together by a rubber band. It was thick. She set it in front of me. "She's been doing this for years," Nancy continued. She targets older people, lonely ones, makes them feel needed, loved. Then she isolates them, turns their families against them. Once she gains control of their finances, she moves on, always with some sob story about being misunderstood. I opened the folder. Inside were copies of restraining orders, screenshots of text messages, and even a statement from an aunt who claimed Rebecca had drained her savings. There were photos too, Rebecca smiling sweetly beside one older man, her arm around his shoulder. The caption read, "My sweet uncle. So grateful for his love." The man's obituary was dated 2 months later. Something inside me went cold. Nancy reached across the table, gripping my wrist. Her hand was small but strong. "Listen to me, Evelyn. Whatever she's doing to you, whatever she's planning, don't let her win. She doesn't stop until her victims have nothing left." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My voice came out hoarse. "She's trying to make me look senile. She's been taking things, whispering to my son. I think they're planning to have me declared incompetent." Nancy nodded slowly. "That's precisely what she did to her grandmother. She forged medical papers, making it look like dementia. Sold her house before anyone realized the older woman was fine. The coffee had gone cold, untouched. I stared at the folder, the evidence of other lives destroyed, and felt fury and shame. Fury at her and shame that I hadn't seen it sooner. "How do I stop her?" I asked finally. Nancy hesitated. "Do you have anyone who can help you? A lawyer? Someone who'll believe you?" I thought of Marcus and immediately shook my head. "No, he's under her spell. He thinks she's saving him." "Then you'll need proof," she said. "Real proof, not just your word." I tucked the folder under my arm as if it were a weapon. "I'll get it." The drive home was a blur. I don't remember the roads or the traffic, only the sound of my heartbeat in my ears. When I pulled into the driveway, their cars were still there. The curtains in the living room shifted a shadow, moving quickly, watching. I sat in the car for nearly 10 minutes before I found the strength to go inside. Rebecca greeted me at the door, smiling a practiced smile. "Oh, you're back early. Everything okay?" Her voice was honey, her eyes were knives. I smiled back, equally sweet. "Everything's fine, just a little errand." She tilted her head. "Did you get your prescription?" "Yes," I said, softly, hanging up my coat. "And a few other things." I could feel her watching me, assessing me. She was too clever not to notice the change, the steadiness in my voice, the calm in my eyes. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker in hers. That night, I locked my bedroom door. Then I hid Nancy's folder inside the lining of my old suitcase, which Rebecca would never touch because it smelled of mothballs. I sat on the edge of the bed and whispered to my husband's photograph, "I have the truth now, and I'm not afraid." But fear doesn't vanish easily. Just after midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate, then a soft rattle, my doorknob turning. I held my breath. It stopped. Then the footsteps retreated. The next morning, Rebecca smiled again, offering me pancakes as if nothing had happened. Marcus kissed her cheek, laughed, and told me they were thinking about plans for the house renovations, maybe even refinancing. My stomach turned. I knew then that whatever they were planning was closer than I'd imagined. I smiled, pretending to sip my coffee while inside my mind was already mapping out every step, every document I'd need, every name I could call. Because the next move, it was mine. The next few days felt like walking through a minefield. Every sound, every word, every glance carried meaning. Rebecca smiled more than ever, but her eyes were cold. Marcus spoke softly to me with that same condescending patience people use when talking to the elderly or the unstable. They thought they were winning. I pretended not to notice. I cooked, smiled, and played with Noah when Rebecca allowed it. I laughed at Marcus's jokes, nodded when discussing house improvements, and even asked Rebecca for recipes to keep her comfortable. But underneath, I was memorizing everything, each lie, each manipulation, each time she whispered something to Marcus that made him look at me differently. I kept Nancy's folder hidden, but its weight pressed on my mind day and night. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and touch the suitcase where it lay to be sure it was still there. And then, on a Thursday morning, the storm finally broke. It started with a knock on the door. When I opened it, two people stood there, a woman in a gray blazer holding a clipboard and a man with a calm professional smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Moore," the woman said. "I'm Dr. Pearson from the Fulton County Department of Health. This is Mr. Bryant, a social worker. We've received a wellness concern from your family." My stomach turned to ice. Behind me, Rebecca appeared, feigning surprise. "Oh, I didn't expect you so soon," she said, pressing a hand to her chest. "I only called because we were worried about her. She's been confused lately." I stared at her, my pulse hammering in my ears. "You called them—" Rebecca's face softened with fake concern. "It's just to check, Evelyn, for your safety." Marcus came downstairs just then, half-dressed, his expression between guilt and exhaustion. "Mom, talk to them. They want to help." Help. That word again. I looked from one face to another, my son's full of misplaced pity, Rebecca's full of deceit, the stranger's filled with polite neutrality. I knew how this would look. An elderly widow trembling slightly, her voice rising as she demanded to be left alone. Every gesture, every tone would feed their version of the story. I forced a calm smile. "Of course. Please come in." We sat in the living room, my living room, while they asked questions. Did I often forget things? Did I sometimes feel disoriented or frightened? Did I ever misplace objects or unfairly accuse others? Rebecca's eyes stayed lowered the whole time, her voice soft and trembling. "She's been under stress. Sometimes she wakes up and forgets where she is. Last week she left the stove on." "That's a lie," I said sharply. The woman scribbled something on her clipboard. Rebecca sighed. "See, this is what I mean. She thinks I'm lying, but it's just sad. I love her. I want her safe." Marcus sat beside her, nodding slowly. I realized how deeply she'd played her part, the innocent caretaker, the loving wife trying to protect the aging mother. She'd woven her web so carefully that even my son was caught in it. But I wasn't the same woman anymore. I straightened in my chair, looked directly at the officials, and said, "You'll find all the information you need in my lawyer's hands if you try to proceed with anything without my consent. And as for confusion, I assure you I know exactly what's happening in this house." The woman blinked, startled. "Mrs. Moore, we're not here to—" "I know why you're here," I cut in. "Someone has been feeding you lies to gain legal control over my estate. And if you continue down this road, I'll make sure your names appear in every affidavit that follows." The room went silent. Rebecca's face twitched, just a flicker, but enough to tell me she hadn't expected that. The doctor cleared her throat. "We'll follow up later, Mrs. Moore." When the door closed behind them, Rebecca dropped the act. Her voice turned low, sharp as glass. "You're making this more complicated than it has to be." I looked at her. "You're playing a dangerous game, Rebecca." She smiled, a slow, venomous curl of her lips. "Oh, Evelyn, you have no idea how dangerous I can be." Then she turned and walked away, heels clicking against the hardwood floor. Marcus avoided my eyes. "Mom, maybe rest today." I didn't answer. I walked upstairs, my legs shaking but my mind clear. If they wanted a war, they'd get one. That night I drove again to meet Nancy's contact, the lawyer she'd mentioned over the phone. David Martinez was a quiet man in his 40s who'd once represented elder abuse victims. We met at a diner just off the highway. He looked tired but kind, the man who'd seen too many injustices and believed in setting them right. I laid out everything, the lies, the missing belongings, the visit from the health department. Then I slid the manila folder across the table. He read for a long time without speaking. When he finally looked up, his eyes were sharp. "This is bad," he said. "She's building a case to declare you mentally unfit. If that happens, your son, or more likely your daughter-in-law, could gain control of your finances and property." "I figured as much," I said quietly. He nodded. "But this file helps. And if we can get evidence that she's manipulating your son or falsifying reports, we can stop her. Do you still have access to your accounts?" "For now." "Good. Move your savings, somewhere separate, somewhere she can't find." "I can do that." "And Evelyn," he said, voice softening, Record everything, every conversation, every call. We'll need proof of coercion if she's already contacted social services. I looked at him, realizing for the first time in months that I wasn't completely alone. Thank you. He smiled faintly. You're not the first mother to be betrayed by her child, but you might be one of the few who fight back early enough to win. When I came home that night, the house was dark. Too dark. The lights in the hallway were off, and the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator. As I closed the door behind me, I heard a soft voice from the living room. Out late, aren't we? Rebecca stepped out of the shadows, arms folded. Her face glowed faintly in the dim light, calm but predatory. Where were you? She asked. I met her gaze evenly. That's not your business. She smiled. It is when you live under my roof. Something inside me snapped. This is my house. Her smile didn't fade. Not for long. She turned and walked upstairs, her perfume lingering in the air, jasmine and musk, the scent of intrusion. I went to my room, locked the door again, and sat by the window. I could feel the tension vibrating through the walls, like the house itself knew it was standing on the edge of a storm. I called David first thing in the morning and told him everything. By noon, he'd filed preliminary papers preventing any legal transfer of my property without a court hearing. I felt a small measure of safety for the first time, thin, fragile, but real, until that evening. Marcus came home early, his face pale. Mom, we need to talk. He sat across from me, avoiding eye contact. Rebecca told me you met with a lawyer. Why would you do that? It makes things look worse. Worse for whom? I asked quietly. He rubbed his temples. You're escalating things. She's trying to help, and now you're making it seem like she's the enemy. I looked at him, my son, the boy I once carried through fevers, heartbreak, and scraped knees, and saw a stranger sitting in his place. I raised you to think for yourself, I said softly, but right now you're letting someone else think for you. His jaw tightened. Maybe you don't know what's real anymore. I stared at him, my heart breaking and hardening all at once. I know exactly what's real, Marcus. You can't see it. He stood frustrated. I'm done arguing. We'll talk later. As he left the room, I whispered, yes, we will. Because now I had allies. I had proof. And Rebecca, for all her games, had finally made one mistake too many. She thought she could trap me in my own home. But she'd forgotten I built this house, and I wasn't about to let her burn it down. The days after my argument with Marcus felt like living inside someone else's life where I was both the prisoner and the ghost. Rebecca no longer hid her disdain. The sweetness vanished completely. Sharp, efficient cruelty disguised as care remained. She monitored everything what I ate when I slept, even when I left the house. My mail began arriving opened. My phone charger disappeared one night. She shrugged when I asked about it. Oh, maybe you misplaced it, Evelyn. Happens to all of us at your age. Marcus didn't see the slow suffocation, or maybe he refused to. Every time I tried to talk to him alone, Rebecca would appear, a hand on his shoulder, a smile too perfect. You're overthinking things, he told me one evening. Rebecca's just trying to make sure you're safe. Safe. That word again, so gentle, so poisoned. I had started recording everything by then, just like David told me. A small recorder hidden inside a flower vase on the mantel, another inside a kitchen drawer, one even in the hallway light fixture where it picked up whispers after midnight. I became invisible in my home, creeping, waiting, watching, because I knew they weren't done yet. 2 weeks later it happened. It was a Sunday morning, quiet and gray. I was sitting at the dining table writing in my notebook when Rebecca's voice sliced through the silence. Marcus, come here now. Her tone was theatrical, urgent. My stomach twisted before I even stood up. When I entered the living room, she stood near the stairs, holding her arm as if in pain. Marcus rushed to her, alarmed. What happened? She pushed me, Rebecca cried, pointing at me. Your mother, she shoved me. I tried to help her get to her chair, but she lost control. For a moment, my mind went blank. What I said stunned. That's not true. Marcus looked at me, confusion flashing in his eyes. Mom, did you? Of course not, I said. I didn't even touch her. Rebecca's tears came right on cue, trembling perfect. I was only worried for her. She's been unstable lately, this proves it. Marcus turned toward me, his jaw tight. Mom, please, go upstairs for now. I stared at him, the son I had once held through every fever, every heartbreak, now looking at me like I was a threat. Marcus, I said quietly, you know me. He didn't answer. Rebecca buried her face in his chest, sobbing softly. I could almost hear the satisfaction behind her tears. I went upstairs slowly, gripping the railing to steady myself. In my room, I closed the door, heart hammering, and pressed my hand against my mouth to stop the scream building inside me. They had made their move. That evening, there was another knock on the door. The same two officials, Dr. Pearson and Mr. Bryant, except this time they weren't alone. Behind them stood a uniformed officer. Mrs. Moore and Dr. Pearson carefully said they had received a report of possible aggression. We'll need to take you for an evaluation for your safety and your family. I could hear Rebecca's fake sobs behind me, Marcus's low, pleading voice. Mom, please. It's just temporary. Temporary, I whispered. You're sending me away. It's not like that, he said quickly. You need rest. They'll help. My gaze swept across them, the son blinded by guilt, the woman drenched in deception, the strangers holding the power to erase me. I smiled. Calm, controlled, the kind of calm that terrified people who underestimated me. All right, I said softly. Let's go. The psychiatric facility was colder than I remembered hospitals ever being. Everything smelled of bleach and resignation. They took my purse, my phone, and even my notebook. A nurse led me to a small room, beige walls, one narrow bed, one window with bars too high to reach. You can rest here until the doctor arrives, she said. I sat down, my body shaking with fury and disbelief. For years I'd cared for patients in rooms like this, confused, frightened, desperate to be believed. I'd never thought I'd become one of them. I tried to stay calm, tried to remember David's instructions. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I waited. It took 3 hours before I was brought into an evaluation room, a desk, a clipboard, and a doctor whose smile was practiced to the point of emptiness. Mrs. Moore. He began, Your family is concerned. They've reported signs of paranoia and memory issues. Have you been feeling confused lately? No, I said evenly. I've been feeling watched. That's different. He raised an eyebrow. Watched? Yes. My daughter-in-law and son have been manipulating me, attempting to gain control of my finances and property. He scribbled something down. I leaned forward. If you're going to write that I'm delusional, make sure you spell my name right. Evelyn Moore. Moore. That startled him. I'm just taking notes, Mrs. Moore. Good, because you'll need them when this goes to court. Something in my tone made him pause. By the end of the session, his confidence had cracked slightly. He excused himself to review documentation. He didn't know that Nancy had already sent David copies of Rebecca's file, including the restraining orders, the financial fraud cases, and testimonies from past victims. David had filed an injunction that morning. I was still sitting in that beige room when the nurse returned holding a phone. It's for you, she said, your lawyer. David's voice was calm, steady. Evelyn, don't worry. I've already spoken with the county board. They can't hold you without evidence. You'll be out by morning. For the first time in days, I felt air fill my lungs. When I returned home the next day, the atmosphere had shifted. Rebecca was waiting by the door, her face pale but composed. Marcus stood behind her, guilt heavy in his eyes. I told them everything I said, setting my purse down. About Nancy, about her file, about the restraining orders. Rebecca's lips parted, but no sound came out. And you'll both be hearing from my attorney soon, I added, every conversation, every lie recorded. Her composure cracked. You can't. Oh, but I can. Marcus tried to speak, but his voice faltered. Mom, please don't do this. I turned to him. I'm not doing anything, Marcus. I'm simply stopping what's already been done. He lowered his head, silent. Rebecca's mask slipped completely, then her face twisted, voice shaking with fury. "You think anyone will believe you? You're just an older woman." I stepped closer, meeting her eyes. "Then you should have ensured the older woman didn't keep receipts." For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then I walked past them, calm and deliberate, up the stairs to my room. Behind me, I heard Marcus whisper something, maybe her name, perhaps mine, but I didn't look back. I sat on the bed in my room and let the silence settle. The house felt mine again for the first time, fragile, scarred, but mine. Outside, I could hear Noah crying faintly downstairs, his little voice cutting through the chaos. It was a reminder that this wasn't over, that innocence still existed amid the wreckage. I closed my eyes and whispered to the photo on my dresser. "We're not done yet, David. Not until she's gone for good." Because Rebecca had tried to bury me, but she'd only taught me how to fight in the dark. The morning after I returned from the hospital, the air in the house was different. It wasn't quiet, not exactly, but a stillness felt heavy, like the moments before a storm. Rebecca moved carefully, as if afraid to make noise. Marcus looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes, deep enough to swallow him whole. I made breakfast, as I always had, bacon, eggs, and black coffee, my husband's old ritual. The smell filled the kitchen, strong, grounding, familiar. Neither of them joined me. That was fine. Let them hide. I sat alone at the table where I'd overheard their betrayal weeks before. Sunlight glimmered across its polished surface, reflecting the silver recorder tucked under my shawl. David had told me to keep recording. "Don't provoke them," he'd said. "Just let them keep talking." So I waited. It didn't take long. By noon, Marcus finally wandered into the kitchen. His shoulders slumped, eyes red-rimmed. He looked more like the boy I'd raised, lost unsure, searching for something solid. "Mom," he said quietly. I didn't look up. "Coffee's still warm." He hesitated, then sat down across from me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The clock on the wall ticked steady and unforgiving. "I didn't know they'd take you like that," he said, voice cracking. "I thought it was just a wellness check." "You thought," I repeated softly, "because she told you to." He flinched. "Marcus," I continued, "when your father died, I promised myself I'd never let you feel alone. I worked 3 jobs so you could finish school. I paid off your loans. I gave you this house because I wanted you to build a life here." He lowered his head, "And this," I gestured around the room. "What did you do with that gift? You brought a viper into my home." "I didn't know, Mom. I swear I didn't." "You didn't want to know." His silence told me I was right. He rubbed his face with both hands. "What happens now?" "Now," I said calmly, "we wait. The police will come soon. David's arranged for a formal statement. They're investigating her now, and your cooperation will matter." He looked up sharply. "The police?" "Yes. For fraud, abuse, falsified documents, and defamation. The paper trail is enough to bury her twice over." I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Fear, maybe realization. "Mom," he said, "I didn't mean for this to go that far." I sipped my coffee, watching him. "Intentions don't change consequences, Marcus." He leaned back, exhaling shakily. She said you were dangerous, that you'd hurt yourself, or maybe even Noah." That last name pierced something deep inside me. "She used my grandson to justify her lies," I whispered. "She's more dangerous than either of us ever imagined." Marcus's voice trembled. "Where's Noah now?" "With Nancy," I replied. "She came by early this morning. I told her to take him before anything else exploded." For the first time that morning, Marcus looked relieved. Thank God. I studied his face, the guilt, the confusion, the faint traces of the boy I'd loved all his life. "You can still make this right," I said, "but you need to decide which side you're on." He swallowed hard and nodded slowly. Rebecca didn't come downstairs until late afternoon. When she did, her appearance startled me. Gone were the pretty blouses and perfect curls. She looked disheveled, her hair, unbrushed mascara smudged under her eyes. But her smile was intact, that same brittle sweetness I'd recognized as the warning before the strike. "Good afternoon," she said brightly. "I hope you slept well after your little trip." I looked up from the newspaper. I did. "How's the arm you pretended I injured?" Her smile flickered but didn't vanish. "You've always had such a sharp tongue, Evelyn. It's going to get you into trouble one day." "It already has," I said for both of us. Her expression hardened. "Do you think anyone will believe your story? You're just an older woman clinging to her pride. Marcus will stand by me." At that, I almost smiled. "Will he?" Rebecca turned slightly just as Marcus entered the kitchen behind her. His face was blank, unreadable. "Marcus," she said, voice softening instantly, "I told your mother we should try to move forward and start fresh." He didn't answer. "Baby," she prompted. Marcus's eyes met mine across the table, and I saw something steady there for the first time, something that didn't belong to her. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. He set it on the counter between them. Rebecca froze. "What's that proof?" he said. "Everything you've said, everything you've done. You forgot I set up the home security system last year." Her eyes widened. You recorded me." He nodded slowly. "Every conversation, every lie you told the doctor, every call to the county office, even the one where you told your friend Jessica to make up medical forms." The color drained from her face. "Marcus, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," he said. "You almost destroyed my mother." I stayed silent, watching her unravel. Her breathing grew uneven. Her hands trembled. She turned to me, voice rising. "You planned this. You turned him against me." "No," I said softly. "You did that all by yourself." The following hours blurred into motion. David arrived with 2 detectives, their badges glinting under the kitchen light. They spoke calmly and professionally, asking Rebecca to sit and answer questions. She tried to perform again, tears, tremors, the pitiful act of a misunderstood woman. But this time it fell flat. The evidence spoke louder than she ever could. When they handcuffed her, she didn't fight. She only stared at me, not with fear, but hatred pure enough to curdle the air. As the car drove her away, Marcus stood at the doorway, silent. The sky outside was the color of bruised steel. "She's gone," he whispered. "For now," I replied. He turned to me slowly. "Mom, I'm sorry." I nodded. "You'll have to live with that, Marcus. But at least now you can start healing." He looked like a man carrying 1,000 unspoken words, but all he managed was, "Can I see Noah?" "Yes. Tomorrow. Nancy and I will bring him home." He nodded again and walked out of the room, his footsteps heavy. That night, the house felt both strange and familiar. I didn't lock my bedroom door for the first time in months. I walked through the quiet halls, touching the framed photos on the wall. My husband in his uniform, Marcus as a boy, holding his first fishing rod, a younger me, smiling with hope. The ghosts of the past didn't haunt me anymore. They watched quiet witnesses to what it had cost to reclaim peace. When I finally lay down, exhaustion took me. But before sleep claimed me, I whispered to the darkness, "It's not over." But it's beginning to be mine again. The day after Rebecca's arrest, the house finally exhaled. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was clean, like rain after wildfire. The walls, for once, didn't feel like they were listening. Marcus didn't go to work. He stayed home, pacing through rooms as if seeing them for the first time. Without Rebecca's perfume lingering in the air, without her sharp heels tapping on the hardwood floor, the house felt lighter, almost tender again. I spent the morning in the garden. The autumn air carried the scent of damp soil and fading roses. My knees ached as I bent to trim the last hydrangeas, but pain had never stopped me. It reminded me I was still here, still alive, still standing. Nancy arrived with Noah around noon. When the boy saw me, he ran across the yard shouting, "Grandma!" His small arms wrapped around my waist, warm and fierce. That single word, Grandma, washed away months of poison. Nancy smiled softly. "He's been asking for you every day." I brushed a curl from Noah's forehead. He's my little soldier. Her expression turned serious. How's Marcus lost? I admitted. But that could be the first step to finding himself again. Nancy sighed. I'll stay close for a while. Thank you, I said. For everything. She squeezed my hand. You'd do the same for me. That evening, Marcus joined me in the garden. He stood awkwardly by the fence watching Noah chase butterflies among the fallen leaves. I can't stop thinking about what happened, he said finally, about how blind I was. I didn't answer right away. The sunset painted the sky in gold and violet streaks reflecting in his tired eyes. Love makes fools of all of us, Marcus, I said. But the difference between a fool and a coward is whether he learns from it. He lowered his head. I don't know how to make it right. You start small, I told him, by facing what you've done, by being a father to that boy. Noah's laughter echoed through the yard. Marcus watched him, his expression breaking apart, guilt, relief, hope, all tangled together. He looks like Dad, he said quietly. He does. I agreed. He even frowns the same way when he's focused. Marcus smiled faintly, then swallowed hard. I want to be better, Mom. I don't want him to grow up hating me. Then don't give him a reason to. He nodded, his eyes glistening. You still believe in me after everything I met his gaze? I never stopped. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The sun slipped behind the trees and the garden glowed in twilight. Somewhere deep inside, I felt something shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the beginning of it. Days turned into weeks. The investigation moved forward quietly. Rebecca's lawyer tried to paint her as a victim, claiming an unstable mother-in-law had emotionally manipulated her. But the evidence spoke louder: audio recordings, falsified forms, testimonies from former clients she'd scammed in her previous life. David called me often, keeping me updated. She's going to serve time, he said. It's just a matter of how long. I didn't feel joy when I heard that, only a weary closure. At night, I'd sit by the window with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, watching the neighborhood's lights. For so long, I'd lived in fear of being erased, of losing everything I'd built. But fear had turned into something steadier now, clarity. The house was quiet again, but not empty. Noah's laughter filled the afternoons. Marcus began cooking dinner terribly but earnestly. Sometimes he'd burn the chicken, and Noah would giggle, "Daddy's smoke again," and I'd laugh each time, not because it was funny, but because it was real. One night, Marcus came into the living room holding a photo album. I found this in the attic, he said, sitting beside me. The album smelled faintly of dust and cedar. Inside were photos of our family through the years, my husband's broad smile, my younger face beside him, Marcus as a child with scraped knees and wild curls. We flipped through the pages slowly. When we reached the last photo, our family on the porch the summer before my husband died, Marcus stopped. I forgot how happy we were then, he said softly. You were a boy, I reminded him. Happiness felt simpler then. He nodded. Maybe that's what I want to find again. I looked at him, the son I'd nearly lost to someone else's shadow, and felt the faintest spark of pride. Then build it. For Noah. For yourself. He smiled, fragile but real. You'll help me always. The first court hearing came 2 months later. I didn't attend. David said it would be unnecessary stress, but Marcus did. When he came home that afternoon, he looked drained but lighter. She pled guilty, he said quietly, fraud and coercion. I nodded, my hand steady on the teacup I held. And Noah. She signed away her rights. She'll be gone for a long time. We sat together in silence. There was no celebration, no relief, just the quiet acknowledgement of something finished. When he finally spoke again, his voice trembled. I don't know if I deserve your forgiveness. I reached across the table and laid my hand over his. Forgiveness isn't a gift, Marcus. It's work, and it's not about deserving, it's about choosing. He looked at me, tears brimming. Do you choose it? I took a breath. Not yet, but I'm learning to. Weeks later, the first snow fell. Noah ran outside in his tiny boots, squealing as flakes melted in his hair. Marcus followed him with a camera, laughing for the first time in months. From the window, I watched them, father and son, framed in white. The world seemed softer, as if the past had finally loosened its grip. I opened the door and stepped outside. The cold air bit my cheeks, but I didn't care. "Grandma, play Noah," shouted. I smiled and joined them, my steps slow but steady. Snow crunched beneath my shoes. Marcus lifted Noah onto his shoulders, and the boy reached for the sky, laughing. For a moment, the ache, the betrayal, the sleepless nights dissolved in the pale glow of winter light. I looked up, letting a snowflake land on my palm. It melted instantly, leaving a single drop of water, fragile, fleeting proof that even the coldest things could change form. That night, as I tucked Noah into bed, he whispered, "Grandma, the snow makes everything clean." I smiled, brushing his hair. "Yes, baby, it does." And for the first time, I believed it. Winter faded slowly that year, reluctant to let go. The snow melted into thin rivers that ran through the garden beds, carrying away the last traces of frost. For the first time in months, I could open the windows again and breathe air that didn't smell like fear. Rebecca's trial was over. She had been sentenced to 7 years, though David told me she might serve less with good behavior. I didn't care about the number. I only cared that she was gone, not as vengeance, but as closure. Marcus had taken time off work. He was rebuilding both inside and out. I watched him repair the old fence in the yard one afternoon, Noah sitting beside him in the grass, hammering small nails into pieces of scrap wood as if he were helping. The sight was almost too much beautiful in its simplicity, painful in its reminder of what had been nearly lost. Occasionally, Marcus would glance up at the window where I stood watching. He'd lift his hand, just a small wave, and I'd wave back. No words needed. Not yet. In February, David visited. He looked tired, lawyers always do after long cases, but his smile carried the calm of a man who'd done right. "It's over, Evelyn," he said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. "The court transferred full ownership of the property back to your name. You're safe." "Safe," I repeated. Funny how that word changes meaning over time. He tilted his head. "You've had a long battle. Longer than I expected," I said, stirring my tea, "but shorter than the years I wasted trying to be loved the same way I gave love." He was quiet for a moment. "Do you want to press for damages?" I shook my head. "No. Let her fade. Let me fade from her story too." He smiled faintly. "You sound at peace." "Not peace," I said. "Just quiet." I sat on the porch wrapped in a shawl that night, watching the stars return. The air was still cold, but softer now, the chill that reminds you you're alive. Marcus joined me, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed me one and sat without a word. We watched the sky together, the quiet stretching between us like an old familiar blanket. "I went to see her," he said suddenly. I turned to him. "Rebecca." He nodded at the jail. I thought, I don't know, maybe I needed to see it for myself. And he exhaled slowly. "She's not the same. Or maybe she is just smaller. Angry, still pretending, but smaller." I studied his face. "And how did it make you feel?" "Sad," he admitted, "and ashamed. Because part of me still loved her once." I nodded. "You can mourn someone and still not want them back. Love doesn't disappear, it just changes shape." He looked down at his coffee. "She asked about Noah." I didn't answer. "You did the right thing." He was quiet for a long while before whispering, "Do you ever think about Dad?" "All the time," I said softly. He'd have been heartbroken to see how far we fell, but proud that we stood back up. Marcus smiled faintly. "He would have told me to stop being an idiot." "Probably," I agreed, chuckling. The wind brushed past us, carrying the faint scent of rain. Somewhere inside, Noah hummed to himself while Nancy helped him with bedtime. The sound drifted through the window, soft as a lullaby. I looked at my son, not the man who'd betrayed me, but the boy who'd found his way home, and felt something in me ease like a muscle unclenching after years of strain. Spring arrived quietly. The garden returned to life, tulips pushing through the soil, the hydrangeas sprouting green tips. Every morning, Noah ran out to check which flowers had bloomed. He'd call out their colors like discoveries: red one, yellow one, grandma, blue one. Sometimes I'd join him, kneeling beside him to plant new seeds. His hands would get dirty, and he'd grin with pride. Marcus started volunteering at a community center nearby, helping other single parents with legal paperwork, budgeting whatever he could. I think he was trying to give back what he'd almost taken. One afternoon, I saw him in the driveway helping an elderly neighbor carry groceries. His gestures were simple, but his eyes were different, softer, less guarded. As I washed the dishes that night, I realized the house was no longer haunted. Not by betrayal, not by anger, just by memory, the kind that stays not to wound, but to remind. One Sunday, Nancy brought an old photo she'd found while cleaning her garage. It was 20 years ago, a church picnic. My husband was there grinning, holding a plate of fried chicken. Marcus was 10, with missing front teeth, standing beside a little girl I didn't recognize. "That's you," I teased Nancy. She laughed. I was skinny back then. Noah climbed onto my lap. "That's Daddy," he said, pointing at the photo. Marcus looked over, smiling. "And that's Grandma's hair when it wasn't gray." I rolled my eyes. "Watch it." Laughter filled the room. Light unforced the sound of something healed. Later that evening, after Nancy and Noah went home, Marcus lingered. He stood by the doorway, hesitant. "Mom," he began, "I've been thinking about moving out. Not far, maybe a few streets over. I think it's time." I looked up from folding the laundry. "You don't need my permission, Marcus." "I know, but I want your blessing." I studied him, the way his shoulders no longer slumped under guilt, the quiet steadiness in his tone. "You have it," I said, "but this will always be your home." He nodded, eyes misty. "Thank you, Mom." When he left that night, I stood in the doorway watching his car disappear down the street. For a moment, the silence returned, not lonely, but proud, the kind of silence that follows survival. Weeks passed. I settled into a rhythm again, reading in the mornings, tending the garden in the afternoons. I'd play my husband's old records on quiet nights with crackling jazz melodies and soft piano. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the window, older, yes, but not defeated. The lines around my mouth told stories of love and loss, but my eyes, they still carried light. Life, I realized, doesn't return to what it was. It simply reshapes itself around the cracks. One evening, Nancy stopped by unannounced, holding a small box. "You might want this," she said, handing it over. Inside was a framed photo of me, Marcus, and Noah taken a week earlier. We were sitting on the porch steps, laughing. Nothing posed, nothing planned, just a captured moment, raw and whole. "It's for your mantle," Nancy said. I smiled. "It's perfect." When she left, I placed it beside the old photo of my husband. 2 lives, decades apart, filled with love that refused to die. As I looked at them, something inside me settled completely. Not happiness, not triumph, just a quiet understanding. Survival had given me back my voice, but forgiveness had given me back my heart. That night, as I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I paused at the doorway of Noah's old room. The moonlight spilled across his toys, his drawings taped to the wall. For a brief second, I heard his laugh again, distant and bright, and I smiled, not the smile of someone who'd forgotten pain, but of someone who'd finally learned to live with it. The house was still. Outside, a soft wind whispered through the trees. It no longer sounded like a warning. It sounded like peace. The following summer arrived quietly, as if it didn't want to disturb what had finally settled. The house had changed again, not in appearance, but in energy. The walls seemed warmer, the air lighter. Sometimes I would wake up and, for a brief, blissful moment, forget everything that had happened. Marcus had moved into a small house just 3 streets away. It had peeling paint, a crooked fence, and a garden barely surviving the heat, but it was his. He spent weekends fixing it up with Noah by his side, wearing identical baseball caps and covered in dust. Every Friday evening they'd come over for dinner. The smell of roast chicken and garlic bread would fill the house. Noah would chatter endlessly, showing me his drawings, or a new scar from falling off his bike. And Marcus would watch him with the quiet, humbled pride of a man who knew how close he'd come to losing everything. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was an honest one. One late afternoon in July, I was sitting on the porch, shelling peas into a bowl. The sun was dipping low, painting everything in gold. Nancy came by with lemonade and a letter in her hand. "This came for you," she said, holding it out. The envelope was thin, the handwriting neat, unmistakably Rebecca's. My chest tightened, but I didn't open it right away. Nancy sat beside me. "You don't have to read it." "I know," I said softly, "but I think I will." I tore it open carefully. Inside were 2 pages folded neatly. "Evelyn, you don't owe me your forgiveness, and I don't expect it. But I need you to know that I've thought about everything, every word, every action, every cruel thing I said. I don't know who I was back then. Maybe I do. Perhaps I was someone who thought pain gave her power, but power means nothing when you've lost everyone who ever looked at you with kindness. Noah doesn't remember me, and maybe that's for the best, but I hope he grows up surrounded by love, even if none comes from me. I've started therapy. I don't know if that makes a difference to you, but it's something. You once told me that family takes care of family. I didn't understand it then. I thought it meant ownership. Now I think it means something much harder: accountability. Take care of yourself, Evelyn. I'm sorry for what I tried to take from you, and thank you for protecting what I didn't deserve. Rebecca. When I finished reading, the pages trembled slightly in my hands. Nancy oversaw me. "You okay?" "Yes," I whispered. "It's strange. She sounds human." "She's still dangerous," Nancy said quietly. Maybe I replied. "But people can rot and still grow new roots. It just takes longer." I folded the letter and placed it in the old wooden box on the table, the same box where I kept my husband's letters from his time in the Navy. It didn't feel like a wound anymore, just a chapter that had finally ended. A week later, Marcus brought Noah over for his 5th birthday. We held a small party in the backyard, nothing fancy, just balloons, music, and too much cake. The neighborhood kids came, and their laughter carried through the summer air like music. At one point, as I watched Noah run across the grass chasing bubbles, I felt tears sting my eyes. Nancy came up behind me, touching my shoulder. "He's happy," she said. "He is," I smiled. "He doesn't carry any of it." "That's the point," she said softly. "You carried it so he wouldn't have to." Her words sank deep into me. For years, my pain had been armor-sharp, heavy, unyielding. But now it was just memory, weightless, transparent, and strangely tender. Later that evening, after everyone left, I sat by the garden lights watching the fireflies blink among the flowers. Marcus joined me, 2 cups of tea in hand. "Mom, he said I saw the letter. I figured you would." "She sent me one too," he admitted. "Said she's trying to change." "And what do you think?" He shrugged. "Some people break too much ever to fit back together. But she could still be better than she was." I nodded. "That's all anyone can hope for." He studied me for a moment. "You forgive her," I thought about it. About the nights I cried alone, about the fear, the humiliation, the betrayal. And then I thought about Noah's laughter, Marcus's healing, the calm that had finally returned to my life. "Yes," I said at last. "But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means I stopped letting her live rent-free in my heart." He smiled faintly. "You always know how to say things right." "Age helps," I said, chuckling. We sat there until the tea went cold, the night wrapping around us like an old quilt. The years that followed passed quietly. Marcus found stability, a steady job, a circle of good people. Noah grew taller, curious, and endlessly kind. Nancy and I grew older like 2 trees sharing the same patch of earth, our roots intertwined through everything we'd survived. I began writing letters, not to anyone, but to the people I'd lost. To my husband, to my younger self, even to Rebecca once or twice. I kept them all in that wooden box next to the letter she'd written me. It became my ritual of peace, a way to speak without bitterness. Sometimes I'd open that box on sleepless nights and read a few lines. They didn't hurt anymore. They were just echoes of a life lived fully, painfully, beautifully. One autumn morning, I woke to the sound of Noah's laughter echoing through the hall. He was visiting for the weekend now, almost 9, his voice stronger but still sweet. "Grandma, see?" he shouted. I went to the living room and he stood beside Marcus, holding a framed drawing, 3 people drawn in crayon, Daddy, Grandma, and me. Tears filled my eyes. "It's us," he said proudly. "It's beautiful," I whispered. He smiled, missing one front tooth. "I want to hang it next to Grandpa's picture." I nodded, unable to speak. Marcus hung it on the wall while I stood beside him, my hand on his shoulder. The drawing was simple, uneven lines, bright colors, but it captured something more accurate than any photograph family, not as perfection, but as persistence. After they'd gone to bed that night, I sat by the window one last time, looking out at the garden bathed in moonlight. The hydrangeas swayed gently, and I thought of all the seasons they'd seen, the frost, the storms, the sun. Somehow they'd survived them all. So had I. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. Nothing was left to fix or fight for the first time in a very long while. Just the quiet hum of a life reclaimed. Outside, the wind carried the scent of blooming jasmine, soft and sweet. I smiled and whispered into the darkness, "We made it."